Hello, algebra friends. Welcome to the last part of section P4, where we're going to do more from the factoring flip book. Okay, so before we jump into where we left off, can we just review really quick what we did in the last video? So the first part was all about finding the GCF, or the greatest common factor. And I cannot overstate how important that is. Whenever you start factoring, friends, always look for the GCF first, before you just dive into regular factoring. Okay, so always look for GCF first. Do first, always. Okay, really important. And then we talked about difference of squares. Do you remember the formula? Without looking at your flipbook, can you tell me what it is? If it's a squared minus b squared, what does that factor into? Remember? All right, did you say a plus b and a minus b? If you did, good job. And these can be switched. It can be a minus b times a plus b, same thing. But hopefully you've already found the GCF first, if there was one. And then if you see two terms, 1, 2. If you see a difference or subtraction, and if you see that both terms are perfect squares, then you can use the difference of squares formula. And then we learned the sum of cubes, that formula that Mr. Brown almost completely bombed last time. Ha ha ha. Okay, without looking, can you tell me? Mr. Brown, you better get this right this time. How about a cubed plus b cubed? Okay, remember we said there's going to be one small parenthesis and then one longer parenthesis that cannot be factored further. This front one should be a and b. This next one should be a squared and b squared with a, b in the middle. And then do you remember that little abbreviation we used to remember the signs? To remember, we used SOAP. Because the first sign here should be the same as the original, S for same, opposite of the original, and the last one is always positive. All right, and again, that last parenthesis never factors further. It is what it is. This one's kind of a tough formula because if you remember, sometimes when we did these steps over here and our A's and B's were kind of complicated, we had to really square everything, not just the variables. Okay, so how to check for this? Do you see two terms? 1, 2. Do you see a sum or addition? And do you see that both terms are perfect cubes? That's when you know to use this formula. Again, assuming you've already used the GCF first. And then the difference of cubes was basically the same idea, but just switching signs. Okay, can you do it without looking? A cubed plus b cubed is small, large. Okay, we got a and b, a squared and b squared. And just a, b in the middle. Remember your SOAP. Everyone uses SOAP. So, oh, Mr. Brown already made a mistake. Do you see that again? Gosh, Mr. Brown. This is what happens when you get old. This is a cubed minus b cubed, right? It says difference. Mr. Brown, read your own notes. I'm sorry. So the beginning is same, opposite, always positive. How do you find this? Again, two terms. You see a difference, which is what I wrote the first time, ha ha, and then are both terms perfect cubes. That's when you're going to use the difference of cubes formula. And again, assuming that you've already done GCF first. Okay, now, here comes one of the standard types of factoring, as if you just have a typical trinomial. This is probably the most popular type of factoring, because we generally play with these kinds of equations a lot in math and in real life too, the typical quadratic or parabola. Now, if this a value in the front, if a equals 1, and this is where we begin today, this is really not that bad. If a does not equal 1, if a is say 2 or 5, this gets really tricky. So if a is 1, this goes back to your Algebra 1 days, and it's basic factoring, and I'll go over that with you again. But if a doesn't equal 1, there's a couple ways to do it, but in general, these are always a little bit tougher. So take really good notes and follow along. Okay, so in general, if you have just a is 1, meaning x squared plus bx plus c, the idea is you want to find two numbers, and they do two things. They add to give you b. And b is right here. Whatever that number is adds to give you b and multiplies to give you c. Right over here. So find those two numbers, and that will help you with your factoring. And then, basically, whatever those two numbers are, those are going to go into your two parentheses with x and x here, and then the two numbers you just found, there and there. But those two green dots, those are your two numbers that add to give you b and multiply to give you c. Okay, let's find a couple of them that where the a value is 1, so that it's just basic factoring. Like, for example, folks, number 35. Now, before I jump into this trinomial factoring, let's look for GCF. It says here in the instructions, we should follow the instructions. Do you see one? No, I don't either. There's no GCF. There's a couple of W's, but not everywhere. And boy, nothing goes in that 13. That's a boober. Okay, and notice the a in the front here. The a in front of the w squared is 1, so we're good to go. So I want you to think of two numbers to add to give you negative 13 and multiply to give you negative 30. What I do is I actually look at the c term first. And I try to think of two numbers to multiply to give you negative 30, and I check and see if those two numbers that I found add to give you negative 13. Now, a lot of you coming from your Algebra 1 and pre-algebra days, if you've done this, you might have developed and learned your own way. Well, do that. Don't have to learn a new way from Mr. Brown. Just do the way that you've always grown up and learned if you felt good with it and if it worked well. So I'm not forcing you to use my way. You can do whatever way you learned before. Okay, let me start picking out numbers that multiply to give me negative 30. And even if I'm wrong, I'm still going to try. How about 6 and negative 5? That multiplies to give me negative 30. But if I add them, 6 plus negative 5, no, that doesn't work. Okay, well, I tried. And even if I change the signs, if I say, how about negative 6 and positive 5, still, they multiply to give me negative 30, but they don't add to give me negative 13, which is what I need, right? Okay, well, the ones I think I'm going to need here, let's see. I almost thought like a 10 and a 3 or something. Because 10 and 3 would multiply to give me 30, and maybe if one of them was negative. That doesn't work either. But that looks pretty popular. So when in doubt, just keep practicing. And really, really, do you see it? It's actually a version of 15 and 2. But I wanted to go through the process and the struggle with you because sometimes you just have to keep practicing and keep going through the different options. And don't give up. You'll find it. It's usually there for you. Just got to keep looking. Now, what's going to be negative? Because if I'm going to use 15 and 2 and get a negative 30, one of these guys got to be negative. Notice I need a negative 13 here, which means the bigger number is going to be negative. Because when you add those, you get a negative 13 out. Hey, folks, I found my two numbers. Here we go. So this is where it comes together. Ready? You set up your two parentheses, yes and yes. This is a w variable, so we'll put w in front and w in the front. And you just include the two numbers that you found. Was a minus 15 and a plus 2. And that's your answer. And now how can we check if our factoring is ever right? Like we said in the previous one, we could always take our answer and FOIL it out. And if we FOIL it out, I guarantee we would get the original function that we started with back out, the original polynomial. Okay, so foiling is always a great way to double check, and I would highly suggest it, especially if you're in the middle of a quiz or test and you have time to do that. You can't get your factoring wrong because you can always FOIL and check your work. Good job, folks. Let's see if we can find another one. Maybe one that has a beautiful GCF in there. Ooh, how about 36? Okay. Well, there is a GCF. Do you see it? Do you see it? It's actually a C. Haha. So let's factor out a c in common. There's no numbers in common, so we'll go with the c. We get c squared minus 22c plus 72. Okay, no other GCFs. And throughout that whole problem, the c that you just factored out is going to stay with us, so just keep them outside the parentheses as we're playing. Okay, friends, ready? I need two numbers to multiply to give you and add to give you. Notice that the value in front of the c squared is 1, so we're fine, we're happy. Okay, two numbers to make 72 and add to give you 22. Okay, this can get a little tricky. I'm thinking here. Well, let's try thinking by putting our C here. And let's keep going with green. Oh, that's not green, Mr. Brown. Meanwhile, as I'm figuring out my color palette, you are working on your factoring. How about C and C? Did you figure it out yet? This one's kind of tough. Okay, well, let's think of a couple numbers. 72. 72 is divisible by 1, of course, and 72. 2 and 36, right? 3 and 24. 4 and 18. Not 5. 6 and 12. Okay, I'm off to a good start, right? But this is another tool that I use sometimes if I don't know where to start, because that 72 is bugging the heck out of me. And I had to really think about it, right? So you should too. So just make a little list here if you want of just all the numbers that divide into that C value and just start making a list. And I notice I need my two numbers to multiply to give me a positive, which means they both either have to be a positive positive or they're both negative negative. Now using a little bit of number logic, do you see that the middle term is a negative? So if my two numbers need to add to give me a negative, do you see that they have to be this type over here? Because when I add two negatives, I get a negative. If I add two positives, I get a positive. So I need to make sure both of my numbers are negative, meaning like a -1 and -72. So let me just change my list here to all negatives. Ooh, look at that. Did you see that? And there you go. Those two numbers are going to multiply to give me a positive 72, and they're going to add to give you a negative 22. We found it. Yay! So we're going to literally take those two numbers, -4 and -18. And that becomes my factored form. Notice that the C that I factored out, GCF, in the first step comes back in the beginning, and he's still there in the front. And there you go, folks. That was a tough one. So maybe this kind of list idea, this list method is helpful too. Let me show you one more that's a little bit tricky before we get into the sort of strange values when A is not equal to 1. Okay, I like 38. Do you see how weird 38 is? Okay, first, GCF, before we even talk about that. Is there a GCF here to factor out? You see, nope, there's not, but we checked. Super proud. But now look at these exponents. Are you kidding me? We have a 4 and a 2 there? That's crazy. You know what? That's too hard. That's too hard. I'm going to pretend it's actually n to the 2 and 16 n to the 1. Okay, I'm going to make it look like the ones that I know and love. I'm going to do that. And I'm going to see how can I switch back and do this. So can we do this one first? And then we'll kind of go backwards. Okay, GCF, again, not there. We're looking for two numbers to multiply to give you 39 and add to give you 16. Okay, I'll give you a second. I'll set up the parentheses while you're looking. Did you think of it? There's not many numbers that multiply to give you 39. And your middle term is positive, so I know my two answers are going to be positive and positive. Did you find 13 and 3? That's what I got to. 13 times 3 is 39, and 13 plus 3 is 16. And there you go. Okay, that's great, but I didn't solve the original problem. I only solved the one that I made here. But can you just take a second and look? What's different between the original problem that we started with and the one that I made? Do you notice I basically just changed the exponents? So if n and the n here multiply to give you n squared, what do you think I need here and here to multiply to give you n to the 4th? Oh, I see. How about just this and this? Look what I did. I just made n squared and n squared. Why? Because those front terms would FOIL and give me n to the 4th. And the good thing is, if I FOIL this out, you're going to notice that when I multiply n squared times 3 and 13 times n squared, my answer will be in terms of n squares, which is the middle term here. Ah, so if you see something, friends, where you see an n or x to the 4th and an n squared and a number, still think of it as your normal trinomial, but maybe substitute and just solve it as if it's an n to the 2 and n to the 1. And then make your front terms over here n squares. So solve it as if it was one of our friendly ones, n squares and n's, but go back and make your front terms squared so that you get n to the 4th. That was tricky, wasn't it? Oof. Come on, algebra. Why can't you be easier? All right, so let's take a peek now. I feel like if a equals 1, we are happy folks. If a is 1, we are jolly. When a is not 1, it's not as easy, friends. So let's find one where a is not 1, even after we do a little GCF action. Okay, Look at 42. 42 is a beauty. First of all, GCF, I see a 6, but there's not a 6 in the middle term, so I can't do GCF there. Okay, no GCF. All right. Now, folks, if the 12 was gone, if it was just a 1, I would be saying, all right, friends, I want you to give me 2 numbers to add to give me 1 and multiply to give you -6, right? That's the normal way to do it. But we can't do that because of that darn 12. Okay. Well, there's 2 ways to do this, friends. I'll show you sort of the less thinking way, but it takes longer to do. And then when we learn the next page of our flip book, we'll go back and we'll use that method to solve this. And that's a little bit more methodical. So the first way I'm going to show you is what's called sort of the guess and check. You're just going to guess numbers that work, check if it works by foiling, and if you get it, yay. If you don't, just try again. This can be frustrating because, again, it might take several tries to get the answer, but there's less brain power needed. Okay, so I'm going to already set up my parentheses, knowing that there's no GCF. And you guys know now, after doing this a couple times, that these 2 blanks here eventually FOIL to give you this friend. And these 2 blanks here are going to eventually FOIL to give you this friend here. The M in the middle, we're not going to worry about now until we FOIL our answer and do the checking part. Okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to come up with 2 numbers that multiply to give you 12m squared. Well, I know it's going to be definitely an M and M, right? M&Ms. Now, what 2 numbers can make 12? Oh my gosh, we got lots of choices, right? We got 1 and 12, we got 2 and 6, we got 3 and 4, and vice versa. So, just for checking, I'll do 2 and 6. How about 2m here and a 6m? That would FOIL and give me 12m squared. Great. Okay, now let's work on the blue lines here. Those 2 numbers need to multiply to give you a -6. So again, lots of choices. A 1 and 6, and one of them's negative. A 6 and 1, one of them's negative. A 3 and the 2. See all these choices? So it can be kind of frustrating if you don't find it the first time, and you have to keep foiling the check. Okay, so why don't we do, I don't know, I'll put, how about a 3 here and a 2 here. And in order to make a -6, let's make this one negative and this one positive. Okay, that's officially your guess. And we're going to check by doing foiling. Ready? Let's FOIL our answers. How about the reds? 2m times 6m is 12m squared. That's good. That's what we started with. Now the inners and the outers. The outers would be 2m times 2, is a 4m. The inners, the -3 times 6m. And the last, the blues. -3 times 2 is -6, which again, we knew we were going to get that. But the most important is look at that inner term. That's 4 minus 18 is -14. Is that what I have up here in the original? No. All right, so we tried, we checked, we didn't get it wrong, we didn't get it right, so we have to start all the way over. So there wasn't a lot of thinking involved, but it could just take several tries until you get the right one. Okay. Well, I'll stick with let's see, we did 2 and 6 for the m's. How about I do 3m and 4m? Okay. And now, what if we do, what could we do here? I guess we could try a 2 and a 3. I'll put a 2 here and a 3 here. And what if we made this one negative and this one positive? Okay, this is another guess. Shall we FOIL? All right, foiling out. Here we go. Hold on to your hats. Outers, inners, lasts. Ooh, look at that. Look at that. What's 9m minus 8m? It's 1m. That's what we started with. Yay! So we found it. Now, we're lucky we found it on the second guess, but this could have taken a really, really long time. So the next method of doing it might be more efficient and less frustrating. It's great. It's called grouping. And grouping happens when you have 4 terms. When you have 4 terms, you use something that's called grouping. Now, the trinomials we're dealing with before on the previous page, those weren't 4 terms, Mr. Brown. Can you count? Yes, I can. Thank you very much. But I'll show you how we're going to turn the trinomial into 4 terms so we can do grouping. So grouping just means if you have 4 terms, 1, 2, 3, 4, that are added or subtracted, you're going to group every 2 into pairs. and do GCF style factoring. Okay, that's what 4 terms. Anytime you see 4 terms, you should aim for grouping. Ready? Let's try it. Okay, 47, the first one. Again, before you start anything, we should still always look for an overall GCF anyway, because it'll make the grouping easier. All right, I'm looking through 47, and I see lots of F's, but the last one doesn't have it. So GCF, me thinks no. All right, so to go into grouping, here we go, guys. So I'm going to group the first 2 friends together here, find a GCF. Then I'm going to group these next 2 terms over here, find a GCF, and then go from there. Okay, ready? Here we go. The first 2 terms, 4f cubed and f squared. There's no number GCF, but I can definitely take out 2 f's. Do you agree? So f squared. Leftovers in just that first pair. How about 4f? And when I factor an f squared out of f squared, it's not 0. I'm not subtracting. It's division. So there. Good. Okay, that one's done. Let's move on to the yellow pair. Okay, what can I factor out of both of those terms? No f's, right? But definitely a 7. I can see a 7 goes into both of them. Okay, leftovers. From the first one, you factor it out and you get a 4f. And when you factor a 7 from a 7, you get plus 1. Now, stop. Did you notice that your parentheses match? Yay, that's a great place just to stop and be like, okay, I'm on the right track and I did it right. If they don't match, either you just made a weird factoring step or maybe you factored the wrong thing. But that's a great place just to stop as a checkpoint and say, I'm doing it right. I'm doing great. Okay, well, you are doing great. And you notice that they both have that red line. So if they both have it, I'm going to literally factor that whole thing out. I'm looking at the big picture, and you notice that both terms, this guy and this guy, they both have the red rectangle in common. So I'm going to factor that huge red rectangle out, right? They both have it. So I factor it out. And when I do you see that the leftovers are just the coefficient type terms, the f squared in front of the rectangle and the plus 7. And there you go, friends. That's your final answer. That's grouping. I like that way a lot. That's really, really cool. So again, first step is you look for GCF. You pair them off into pairs like we did before. You do GCF on each one. You check and see if your parentheses match, so you're on the right track. And then basically, do you see that you take out the parentheses, and then whatever is in front of the parentheses is in the next parenthesis. Okay? Shall we do another one together? Let's try. They all look so good. I'll do 50. Okay, feel to start this without me if you like, folks, if you feel like you got the hang of it after the first try, or if you've done this before. All right, number 50. So, GCF check. Anything? Nope. But it's good that we checked. All right, let's pair them off, folks. Yep and yep. All right, what can I take out of that first pair? I think a 2 and maybe 2 J's. All right, leftovers. How about 4 and 1 J? And then from the second term, when I factor a 2J squared out of 6J squared, you divide and you basically get 3. All right, cool. Next pairing, 28J minus 21. All right, no J, but I think I can take out a 7 again. Leftovers. Wow. We look at your parentheses, they match. That means we did it right. So our last step is take out the parentheses. And what was in front of the parentheses becomes your second parentheses. And that's your final answer, folks. Again, you can FOIL this out, and you should, just to check on a quiz or test, but that's it. All right, so there you go. So now, that's why when I go back and I do number 42 all over again, I'm going to erase everything else here. I'm going to erase all this junk. This is terrible. Ew, 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 ew. I don't want to guess and check ever again. If my A value is not 1, I don't ever want to do this way. I'm going to keep the answers there so you can see it, though. So you'd be like, wow, ta-da. But I don't ever want to guess and check anymore again because it's annoying. Hurts my brain. Let's do it the grouping way. Here's what I mean. Okay, I'm going to do 42 over here if it doesn't bother you. Okay, so again, the normal way was, can you find 2 numbers to add to give me 1 and multiply to give me negative 6? But we can't do that because of the darn 12. But watch what I'm going to do. I'm going to take that 12 And I'm going to take that minus 6, and I'm going to get negative 72. How did I get that, folks? Did you see? I multiplied. I multiplied basically the ends, the bookends. So now I ask you this, folks. I want to come up with two numbers that still add to give you the positive 1 that was over here. Give me two numbers to add to give you 1, but now multiply to give me not negative 6, but this number. This is the one you're going to multiply to, and this is the one over here, the plus 1 you're going to add to. Okay? Can you think of two numbers that multiply to give you negative 72 and add to give you a plus 1? Okay, I'm going to do this kind of quick just because I think we're getting better at it. But I know that 9 and 8 make 72. To make it a negative, and to get a positive 1 when I add them, I'll make the 8 negative. Okay, ready? So now that you've done this, what you do is you keep the bookends the same. I'll keep the 12m squared, and I'll keep the negative 6 the same. I'm going to change the middle term, the plus m, using these two numbers. I'll use a 9m and a minus 8m. You see what I did? Do you guys agree that this middle term is the original m that I had in the beginning? I just broke it down using the two terms that I found here. Okay, hey, look how many terms we have. What do you think we're going to do? Yeah, we're going to be doing grouping. Okay, ready? So what can I take out of the first two terms? Oh, this has got a bunch. I've got a 3 in common and 1m. Leftovers? How about 4m plus 3? Now in the second term, do you notice this here, folks? Do you notice that negative? Always take it out. Always, always, always. When? Always take it out when you do your GCF. And you'll see why in a second. In these two terms, how about a 2? And methinks that's it. All right, leftovers, ready? It's going to be a positive 4m because we took out negative 2. And careful, ready, ready? This is a plus 3. Did you catch that? Not a minus, but a positive. Now, the reason I took out negative 2 is, do you see what I got inside? And do you see how it matches this? If I took out a regular 2, I would have a lot of negatives in there and it wouldn't match. So when you see a negative sign next to the third term, factor it out. Okay, we're almost done. Do you see the 4m's in common? 4m plus 3? Let's factor it out. And what's left over are the terms that were in front. Have you seen this before? Like, right here! Look at that! Yay! So guess and check way? No, thank you. I think that's really hard. The factoring way by grouping is much more methodical if you know the steps, and it's actually easier because you have a plan of attack. Guess and check, you're just throwing up your arms and just guessing, which I don't like. So I'm going to put up here in our notes, if a doesn't equal 1, we try grouping. I think that's the best way, and that comes from the second page. So if a is not equal to 1, after you look for a GCF, try the grouping way. All right, and now we're on the home stretch, folks, where basically you throw everything in the bag. This is mixed factoring, where basically, again, you always look for a GCF first, and then whatever's left over, oh, just good luck. Use everything you know, all your tools, all your weapons, all your powers, whether it's a difference of squares, a sum of cubes, a difference of cubes, 4 terms for grouping, or just a normal trinomial. But look for GCF first and see what you have left. Okay, in the next video, I'm going to try a couple of these, but I bet you're probably okay if you just give it a try. But I do want to walk through a couple of them with you to make sure you are okay. But that is the end of factoring, folks. I hope you did okay, and I will see you next time. Good job, everybody.